Hey, what is up guys, Rockdog here. I'm making this video because I'd like to address the new armor and even some of the old armor in For Honor, specifically the Viking equipment, as that is my area of expertise and why I find it to be rather disappointing. Hopefully someone who knows a lot about the other factions can give their take as well. I know at this point it's kind of late, but it doesn't really matter. Without further ado, let's begin. When I heard there was new armor coming to For Honor, I was hoping to get somewhat historically accurate gear, as in my opinion, that is the most aesthetically pleasing option Ubisoft could have gone with. Because let's face it, I'm sure at least some of us got into For Honor because of its interesting historical setting, and would have liked it to be as historically accurate as possible without affecting gameplay. When I saw the new Viking armor, the pieces I liked the most were the new helmets, and no, not Leatherface. I mean the actual iron helmets, such as the Spangenhelm or nasal helmet. However, all we really do have for Viking helmets in For Honor are the simple iron helmets, which ideally could be cool, except that they're mostly covered in leather, fur, horns, or other additions to the helmet you can't get rid of. There's so much more you could do with Viking helmets, some examples being Gearman boos, either open or closed, as long as they're not being hidden by layers of fur, the beautiful and intricate Valsgard helmets, or even Coppergate helmets like the Anglo-Saxons had, which would all fit very well in For Honor. Moving on to body armor. All we've seen so far in terms of Viking armor has been leather and fur armor, which we have no evidence that the Vikings did use those, as organic material is very rarely preserved for so long. What we do have evidence of is riveted mail armor, which is the exact same thing knights of the 11th century had. These were most likely worn over gambesons, padded linen coats made to absorb the force of the impact of a blow. However, ignore the straps in the picture, as those are not historically accurate. Vikings would not have had that on their gambesons. And we do know Ubisoft knows what gambesons are. After all, the warden is wearing one under his armor. In some instances, Vikings who were well off also had lamellar or scale armor on top of their mail armor. What made me laugh about scale armor, and I admit confused me for a little bit, was that one of the Highlander chest plates does have scale armor design in it, even if it isn't made from metal. But if you like the design of scale armor, why not just use the actual thing? Now I know what you're thinking about scale, lamellar, and riveted mail armor. You're probably thinking these were way too heavy and wouldn't complement the Vikings' agile fighting style in For Honor. However, if you wear these armors with a belt, which is the proper way of wearing them in the first place, all of the weight of the armor is distributed to the hips and doesn't hang on the shoulders, which would allow you to run and jump no problem. In fact, it would offer you more mobility than the heavy leather robes we currently have in the game, which aren't of practical design. Also, it'd be nice to have a bear cloak for Berserker, since all we currently have in the game is a wolf head for it. In fact, Berserker is Old Norse for bear warrior. Ulfhednar would have been wolf warrior. The bear cloak should also cover the entire body. It shouldn't just be a single headpiece like we see in For Honor. Also, if you didn't know, Berserker and Ulfhedin actually existed. There were in fact warriors that really did wear bear and wolf cloaks, and these fighters would truly enter bloodthirsty frenzies, where they practically didn't feel any pain on the battlefield. It's uncertain to us if they used some kind of unknown narcotic, or if they built the frenzies up themselves through mental preparations, but what we do know is that they believed they were being possessed by the spirit of the beast whose skin they're wearing when they entered these frenzies. Moving on to weapons. Now this is where things get bad. Viking weapons were of simple design but very effective and well made. In For Honor, we see the exact opposite of this. Viking weapons in For Honor are divided into two groups. We either have the gold-plated, covered in gems, excessively decorated weapons, or the simple but crude, scratch and chipped weapons. The same goes for the shields, either solid metal shields, which the Vikings never had, or these wooden battered shields. You know, Vikings knew what maintenance was, right? The full metal swords, axes, and shields would never have been created. It is true that some Viking swords did have some metal plating, but these were only on the guard and pommel. The grips would usually have been carved out of wood to isolate vibrations, sometimes wrapped in leather for the comfort of the user. These full metal weapons wouldn't have been of practical design anyway, as they would have been way too heavy, and even if you did get a hit with them, the vibrations would travel right into your hand as there is nothing to isolate them. Also, these designs aren't even aesthetically pleasing, at least in my opinion. I'm assuming the excessive decorations are to indicate nobility or status, but swords were already status symbols themselves, meaning adding gems to your sword in order to look wealthy back then would have been like decorating a Rolls Royce to make it look expensive. And don't believe this to be an exaggeration. A good sword back then would have costed the same as a house. An excellent sword, the price of a small castle, which we'll get into right now. If you really want to show that you're prosperous and do it in a historically accurate way, but regular Viking swords aren't good enough, there's the infamous Ulfbird swords. These swords are extremely expensive and were mostly owned by Scandinavian noblemen. The reason being that they were made of crucible steel, cast iron and pure iron melted inside of a crucible, sealed with clay to eliminate the contaminants from the middle of the metal and make for a very durable sword. These swords were a very simple design and had a caption engraved into the blade that read Ulfbird. Now on to shields. Shields in For Honor aren't at all of practical design and lack variety. They are purely made of metal, which wouldn't have been used. And what is with the thickness of these shields? I'm sure a lot of us would like to see some painted wooden shields, like the actual Vikings had. The outline, or skjolrond, as Vikings would have called it, could be a rawhide cover, painted or not, and it looks pretty good on a shield. The only parts made of metal on a historically accurate Viking shield would be the boss, and sometimes the outline depending on the shield. Some were also tapered from the center to the edge. I'll end this video off with some of my ideas for potential future heroes Ubisoft could add. It'd be cool to have a Jomsviking type of Norseman. The Jomsviking were a group of elite Viking mercenaries during the 10th and 11th century. They would serve anyone who could afford their services, and even occasionally fought for Christians, even though they were pagan. This hero could wear a mail hauberk with flammable armor on top, wielding a simple shield and sword, and finally, a Valsgard helmet. The best part about this combination is that it isn't at all anachronistic, as during the 10th and 11th century, all of those armaments were in use. It's also a realistic combination, as the Jomsviking could very well have afforded all of that. Another cool hero idea would be a Norman knight. The Norman knights were a group of knights that descended directly from Vikings. They were given land by Charles the Simple, King of France, after they attacked France and besieged Paris. Over time, they adopted the French culture and began to resemble knights. As you can see in the picture, they look like a cross between a Viking and a knight, and even had their own cavalry. I think these sorts of characters would be great additions to the game, as well as all the other things mentioned in this video.